Winter 2021. The skies over Europe are eerily quiet, yet relentlessly active. A massive wide-body jet pushes back from a gate at Frankfurt Airport, taxis to the frozen runway, and accelerates into the overcast sky. The cabin is practically vacant. There is no commercial justification for this machine to leave the ground. Yet, over the course of a few brutal months, the Lufthansa Group alone will authorize 18,000 extra commercially unnecessary flights. 18,000 times, hundreds of tons of metal are hurled into the stratosphere. Millions of gallons of jet fuel are burned into the atmosphere. The economic drain is staggering. The environmental cost is catastrophic. Yet, executives in boardrooms across the continent schedule these departures with cold precision. They are not flying for profit. They are flying for protection. To understand why one of the world's largest aviation conglomerates would intentionally bleed cash to fly near empty planes, you have to look past the aircraft and look at the invisible grid resting on the tarmac. An airport is not a public square. It is a fortress of gated access.
And at the most congested hubs on Earth, London Heathrow, Frankfurt, Paris Charles de Gaulle, the most valuable asset is not the terminal, the runway, or the fleet of planes. It is time. Specifically, the legal right to take off and land at a specific minute of the day, a slot. This is a story about the unseen architecture of global travel. It is a story of how a bureaucratic mechanism designed to create fairness mutated into a high-stakes, multi-million-dollar real estate market. A system where airlines will burn thousands of tons of fuel, not to move human beings, but to satisfy an archaic mathematical formula. Welcome to the ghost flights.
Before 1993, the sky was, theoretically, an open frontier, but the ground was full. As commercial aviation exploded in the late 20th century, a physical bottleneck emerged. You can build larger aircraft, but you cannot easily pour concrete for a new runway in the middle of London or Frankfurt. Capacity hit a hard, physical wall. Airlines that had been operating since the dawn of the jet age, the legacy carriers, held a natural monopoly. They parked their schedules at the most lucrative times, the 7 a.m. departure for corporate travelers, the 6 p.m. return. New airlines wanted in, but the legacy carriers simply refused to move. To break this deadlock, regulators and the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, formalized a system of airport slot coordination. A slot is defined simply: the scheduled time of arrival or departure available or allocated to an aircraft movement on a specific date. But in reality, it became a deed of ownership. The European Union enshrined this in 1993 with a defining piece of regulation. To prevent legacy airlines from squatting on prime slots and never using them, the regulators introduced a ruthless mandate, the 80-20 rule.
Use it or lose it. The math is absolute. An airline must operate a flight in its designated slot at least 80% of the time over a flying season. If they hit 80%, they are granted grandfather rights. The slot is theirs for the next season, and the season after that, in perpetuity. If they operate at 79% of the time, the slot is confiscated. It goes back into a regulatory pool and is handed to a competitor. The intention was pure operational efficiency. If you are not flying, step aside for someone who will. The regulators wanted to maximize runway usage and prevent anti-competitive hoarding. But intention rarely survives contact with the market. By creating a finite resource and attaching permanent ownership to it, the regulators accidentally minted a new global currency. A slot was no longer just a schedule entry. It was an intangible asset with immense scarcity value. At constrained airports, no new slots were being created. The only way to get one was if someone else failed the 80% test, or if they sold it to you. A shadow market emerged.
Airlines began to realize that the right to land a plane at Heathrow at 8 a.m. was worth more than the physical plane executing the landing. In 2016, Oman Air paid Air France-KLM a reported $75 million for a single prime morning slot pair at London Heathrow. $75 million for a line of text in a scheduling database. The 80-20 rule transformed from a mechanism of efficiency into a mechanism of terror. For an airline executive, losing a $75 million asset because of a temporary dip in passenger demand is a fireable offense. The asset must be protected at all costs. The slot must be flown. The formula demands movement, and the formula does not care if the seats are empty. To enforce this invisible market, a network of silent arbiters operates behind the scenes of every major airport. They are known as slot coordinators. They are independent bodies, funded by airlines and airports, operating under strict national and international frameworks. In the United Kingdom, it is Airport Coordination Limited. In Germany, it is Fluco. These entities do not care about passenger load factors. They do not care about ticket yields, marketing campaigns, or corporate profitability. They care only about the audit. Every season, summer and winter, the airlines submit their schedules. The coordinators cross-reference the actual flown data against the allocated slots. The spreadsheet is the ultimate authority. Did the flight push back from the gate? Yes or no? Did it reach the 80% threshold? For the legacy carriers, this system is a protective moat. British Airways holds more than half of the slots at Heathrow. Lufthansa dominates Frankfurt and Munich. These airlines have built entire financial architectures upon these intangible assets. Slots are pledged as collateral for multi-billion-dollar corporate loans. They are listed on balance sheets.
They dictate the valuation of the holding company. If a new low-cost carrier wants to challenge Lufthansa in Frankfurt, they cannot simply buy planes and start selling tickets. They must acquire slots. But the slots are locked away, protected by grandfather rights, held tightly by the incumbent. The legacy airlines know that their dominance is predicated entirely on passing the use it or lose it test. They employ dedicated slot management teams whose sole job is to monitor compliance. These analysts watch the percentages like stock traders watching a crashing market. If a particular route is underperforming, if a daily flight to a secondary city is only flying half full, the airline cannot simply cancel the route for the rest of the season to save money. Canceling means the percentage drops. The percentage dropping means the slot is confiscated. The slot being confiscated means a rival moves in. Therefore, the rational economic decision is to fly the plane at a loss. The cost of jet fuel, crew salaries, and maintenance is a fraction of the capital value of the slot. The regulators built a system to ensure runways were always used for passengers.
Instead, they built a system where airlines are financially incentivized to fly empty metal tubes across continents. It is a loophole hiding in plain sight, waiting for a profound global shock to expose its fatal flaw.
In early 2020, the shock arrives. The global pandemic grounds the aviation industry in a matter of days. Passenger demand drops to near zero. Borders close. Under the strict interpretation of the 1993 slot regulations, airlines face immediate annihilation. If they cannot fly, they will lose every single prime slot they hold. Their balance sheets will be wiped out overnight. Facing industry collapse, regulators in the EU, the US, and Asia issue an emergency waiver. The use it or lose it rule is temporarily suspended. Airlines can park their fleets without forfeiting their real estate. For a brief moment, the skies are quiet and the math is paused. But as the world tentatively reopens in 2021, the bureaucracy demands a return to the formula. The European Commission decides that the full suspension is no longer justified. They reinstate the rule, albeit at a temporarily reduced threshold of 50% for the winter 2021-2022 season. This is where the collision between rigid regulation and chaotic reality occurs. The Omicron variant surges. Borders slam shut again in disjointed, unpredictable waves. Corporate travel remains dead. Passengers cancel bookings en masse. The demand simply does not exist to fill the planes, but the 50% threshold is now active. The slot coordinators are running the spreadsheets. The countdown has resumed. Inside the Lufthansa Group, which includes Lufthansa, Swiss, Austrian, and Brussels airlines, the executives stare at an impossible calculus. They have thousands of flights scheduled. The passengers have vanished. If they cancel the flights, they fail the 50% threshold. If they fail the threshold, they lose slots at Frankfurt, Munich, and Vienna. If they lose those slots, low-cost rivals like Ryanair will seize them, permanently eroding Lufthansa's market share and wiping hundreds of millions of dollars off their valuation. In December 2021, Lufthansa CEO Carsten Spohr steps before the microphone and reveals the brutal internal calculation. To protect their takeoff and landing rights, the Lufthansa Group will have to operate 18,000 flights they identify as commercially unnecessary during the winter season. These are not always planes with literally zero passengers. Some carry a handful of travelers or a pallet of cargo. But they are flown at a massive loss, essentially as ghost flights, purely to satisfy the regulatory threshold. Brussels Airlines, a subsidiary, admits it expects to operate 3,000 such flights by March 2022. The public reaction is visceral. Environmental groups are outraged. The European Union has staked its reputation on cutting carbon emissions, pledging to reduce greenhouse gases by 55% by 2030. Yet a European regulation is directly forcing airlines to emit hundreds of thousands of carbon dioxide for absolutely zero commercial benefit. A wide-body jet flying a typical European route burns thousands of kilograms of fuel per hour. Multiply that by 18,000 flights. The carbon footprint is massive. The optics are disastrous. Lufthansa pleads with the European Commission for flexibility. They point to the United States, where the Federal Aviation Administration has maintained deeper waivers for international flights. They point to the sheer environmental vandalism of the mandate. But the European Commission holds the line. They argue that the 50% threshold is already a massive concession from the usual 80%.
They argue that some low-cost carriers are actually eager to fly and would gladly take the slots if Lufthansa refuses to use them. Rival executives publicly mock the legacy carriers, claiming they are crying crocodile tears and should simply lower ticket prices to fill the planes. But lowering ticket prices to $10 does not cover the cost of operation, and in a pandemic wave, people will not fly, even if the ticket is free. The planes take off, day after day, through the bitter winter of 2021 and 2022. Heavy jets climb into the European airspace. Flight attendants walk down empty aisles. Pilots communicate with air traffic control. The intricate, highly synchronized ballet of global aviation is performed for an audience of none. It is a profound market failure, enforced by law. The regulatory mechanism, designed to optimize public infrastructure, is now actively working against both the economy and the environment. The asset protection strategy overrides all other logic. The ghost flights are not a glitch in the system. They are the system, working exactly as it was designed.
By the time the pandemic restrictions fully fade, the slot waivers expire entirely. The 80-20 rule returns to its full, unforgiving power. The Lufthansa ghost flights eventually cease, absorbed back into the normalized flow of global travel. But the underlying architecture remains completely unchanged. The incident exposed the fragile, hidden wiring of the global economy. We tend to believe that vast physical systems, transportation, energy, logistics, are governed by rational supply and demand. If people want to travel, a plane flies. If they do not, it stays on the ground. The ghost flights reveal a darker truth. These systems are governed by rigid legacy contracts and mathematical thresholds formulated decades ago. When reality deviates from the formula, the system does not adapt. It forces reality to bend to the formula. A $75 million slot pair at Heathrow is an entirely synthetic asset. It is a legal fiction, conjured into existence by a regulatory need to manage congestion in 1993. Yet this legal fiction holds so much power that it commands the physical movement of thousands of tons of steel and jet fuel. It dictates corporate strategy.
It overrides environmental mandates. The slot allocation market operates perfectly, blindly, without regard for consequence. It is a machine that measures only its own metrics. As global infrastructure becomes increasingly strained, as ports, power grids, and airspace reach their physical limits, we rely more heavily on allocation algorithms to decide who gets access.
The 80-20 rule was created to prevent monopolies. It ended up forcing airlines to burn the sky to protect their balance sheets. The rules hiding underneath familiar life rarely announce themselves until they break. What happens when the formulas that govern our most critical infrastructure become more valuable than the physical reality they were meant to manage?